And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of the Assembly Call. Certainly not a victorious one today, as Indiana goes on the road to Ohio State and loses 82-70. It's a game. If you were kind of following the point spread during the day, the money was on the Buckeyes as the day went. I think the line jumped from 7 to 9 just today, and the people betting on the Buckeyes sure looked smart, as the Hoosiers are unable to. Oops. Sorry. Yeah. So anyway, sorry, I got distracted there. Had the YouTube video open, which is actually kind of a perfect opening to the show. Disjointed, a little unfocused, kind of like the Hoosiers were today on defense. So let's just pretend that I did that on purpose. But anyway, you're watching the Assembly Call. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, and we're going to break down this Indiana loss, which really came down to one thing, and that was defense. Just defensive breakdowns over and over again for the Hoosiers. But to begin these shows, I am tasked with finding the positive in this Indiana loss. And so here it is, kind of the banner moment for today. You know, there's living by the three, there's dying by the three, and then there's hanging on for dear life by the three. And that is what Indiana did today, as you know, the Hoosiers were able to, I guess, quote-unquote, overcome 15 turnovers and terrible defense. It really felt like Indiana should have lost by 20 or 30 points today, and they didn't. They lost by 12, and for most of the second half, they were within one run of making it a game. And so many IU games have come down to runs. Indiana's been able to have that spurt on offense to get them back into it. And I know there was a lot of negativity on Twitter that I was saying, but I kept thinking, you know, if we keep hanging around, we're going to make this run because of the threes. I mean, Indiana makes 12 of 25 from downtown. They shoot 48% from three-point range. But really, it was almost like the three-pointers were just kind of, you know, the stay of the execution. You know, they were just kind of keeping Ohio State from blowing the game wide open because, unfortunately, the Hoosiers weren't able to play any defense. So, you know, the one positive in a game where there weren't too many was that, once again, we saw that Indiana's shooting can mask some of its deficiencies. Unfortunately, today, the deficiencies were so bad that even a pretty good shooting day wasn't able to even come close to overcoming them. So we'll talk about that on this episode of the Assembly Call. If you have any questions, comments, you can tweet us. Use the hashtag Assembly Call. I've actually had a few emails already. People upset about Stan Robinson playing in the first half, so we'll get to that as well. So email as well if you want to do that. But with that said, let's go around the horn. Let's get Andy and Ryan's initial thoughts on this game, and something tells me without the obligation to be positive, they won't be quite as positive as I was. Andy, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'll leave the defensive talk to Ryan, as I know he wanted to talk about that. But you know, for me, it was the turnovers in the first half. It felt like we were in some kind of horrific time machine back to last year, with just most of them of the careless variety as well. It wasn't even necessarily turnovers out of, you know, effort, things like that. It was just carelessness and guys really getting out of rhythm. And as good as the offense looked for the first few minutes, it looked just as bad over the last, you know, probably 12 to 15 minutes there. And so 11 turnovers in the first half. There was one stretch I wrote, they went almost 4 minutes without getting a shot to even hit the rim. They took one shot over like a 6 or 7 possession span. I think it was 7. They turned it over on 6. The 7th was Blackman getting rejected on a shot that there was a poor decision on his part to even shoot. So it was just as good as a turnover in that regard. And so, you know, before that, it had been, you know, about 4 minutes, you know, since, you know, they had a decent shot. And no matter how good this team is offensively, we know what the defensive limitations are, even though today those were more pronounced than usual. And no matter how good IU is offensively, I tweeted this out toward the end of the game, the margin for error still isn't very big. I mean, we saw this in road wins at Nebraska and Illinois, and those were great wins, but it wasn't like they were running teams off the floor. And even against Maryland, you looked at some of the effective field goal numbers, which were just gaudy, but they'd given up almost the same thing to Maryland. And so I think that it just, you know, this team can afford to maybe not take care of the ball, but they can't play terrible defense, or they can afford to play terrible defense but take care of the ball, which is really something they had done well this season. Tweeted coming into the game, Ohio State was first in forcing turnovers defensively. IU was second in taking care of the ball on offense. And for the first half when the game really swung and got out of IU's hands. For the most part, that was really all around the turnovers, and so I thought that was really set the tone. And then the defensive woes pretty much took over from there and really made it feel like no matter how good IU started doing offensively, and no matter how many threes they hit, you didn't get the feeling they could string together enough stops to truly get back in the game and put any real game pressure on IU or on OSU, and that was definitely the way that it shook out.
All right, Ryan, rant, buddy.
I mean, this is the worst defensive performance, in my opinion, we've seen from Indiana all year, and we've had some bad ones. But this was, I mean, how many cutters for Ohio State just ran right through the middle of the floor, wide open, with no one recovering, no one helping, and no one really chasing them. It was guys out of position, just completely not communicating, and that was the key. Look, the effective field goal percentage for Maryland was high the other night. But that team was communicating, and they were making sure they were, at least close to their assignments and doing what they were supposed to do and playing better defense, I thought. And today, it was just brutal. I mean, there's nobody was talking, nobody was in position. I mean, guys like Colin Hartman, who you rely on as like a rock to always be in the right spot, he was lost for. I mean, it was pronounced in the first half how lost he was on defense. And people were talking after the Maryland game like, oh, even when Hunter comes back, we should start Hartman to do this 5-out no-in offense, and who cares what about defense because we'll be running our offense and they'll have to adjust us. No. You do not base your lineups on offense. You base them on defense, and the reason why is because of today. With no rim protection, it was a disaster for Indiana. At least with someone like Hunter, even if he's a disaster offensively, defensively, you've got someone in the lane who can alter shots. Today, there was none of that. And even when Emmett Holt was in there, they just had no fear of going to the hoop right over Indiana. And so that's why it's important to have somebody in the post. And that's why every team in this country that can puts one of their big guys in their starting lineup. It's for defensive purposes and to have a shot, someone who can alter shots. And, Indiana's defense just had a huge gaping hole in the lane today, and nobody stepped up to do anything about it. Nobody recovered. There was no help, and Ohio State just had their way. I mean, Ohio State shot 62.3% from the field and only hit 5 3-pointers and only shot 33% from three. All of those baskets were going to the rim or were inside the three-point lane and the three-point line, and it was just way too easy. And Indiana cannot let that happen, especially during this tough stretch of games they've got coming up.
Yeah, there's a certain epic Bob Knight locker room rant that was secretly recorded that, Tom Crean might as well just play that in the locker room after this game. If you're going to let him drive by you, there were a lot of people doing the Greg Graham defense from that game and just letting guys drive by him. I mean, Ohio State, 1.31 points per possession. It was just a terrible, terrible focus, terrible effort on defense. And again, the three-point shooting kind of masked it. I mean, this really felt like a game that Indiana lost by more than 12 points. So on the one hand, you're kind of proud that they were able to focus enough on offense to make those shots. But, this is not a defensive effort that is going to get Indiana where they want to go. Now, before we delve into more of the negatives, one last positive here, which is that, this wasn't really a game that you expected Indiana to win before the season. This is one of those that you kind of chalk up as a loss. And even after that win over Maryland, I know I picked Indiana to win, but I think, and you guys can agree with this or disagree, I still, had a little kind of nagging feeling about this game because we just haven't played very well at Ohio State. So often we see teams that come off huge road wins, go on the road, you struggle. So I'm not shocked that Indiana lost this game, and it doesn't really change what I think Indiana can do for the rest of the season, but it certainly highlights some of the concerns that we've had and some of the fears that we've had. And one of them is Troy Williams. And so I want to get your guys' thoughts on Troy because I thought going into this game, Indiana needed all Big Ten Troy to show up and really play well. And early on in the game, it looked like he was going to do that. But after that first stretch, it's kind of hard to – you almost forget how great Indiana started this game out, the 9-2 run. Made their first 8 shots. It was all downhill from there pretty much. But, Troy for the game, 8 points, 3 assists, only 2 boards. He had 5 turnovers. I thought he had a couple of spurts where he played with a lot of energy, and Indiana played pretty well during those spurts. But for the most part, he was really neutralized. I didn't think he quite had the energy. He was making some poor decisions. He sat for longer stretches than we've seen him, in part, I think, because Tom Crean sensed that Troy just wasn't quite as into that game as he's been. It certainly wasn't as bad as the Michigan State game, but it was what Indiana needed to get a big win on the road. Andy, is there anything Ohio State did to Troy that contributed to that, or was this more a case of him not bringing it like he has been?
It's probably a little bit of both, I would say. I mean, from my standpoint, they definitely – other teams have been doing this as well, but, I mean, they were pretty much daring him to shoot jumpers, and he didn't take him up on that at any point, but he also – continued to drive the ball into traffic and really didn't do very much off the ball, which is what I really thought the difference was when you started to look at when he started to be really effective toward the end of the half against Maryland was when, was when he was really working the baseline. And at no point today did it really feel like he did a ton off the ball. Instead, it felt like he was constantly, out of control, trying to get to the rim and do things off the dribble that really weren't there. I thought in a couple cases there was the fast break he got called for a charge on. There was another one, maybe it was the same one. I don't know that. Now it's probably the same one where he didn't give the ball up early enough. But just way too much dribbling from him. It kind of made me feel a little bit like what you had talked about earlier in the year where you didn't want to see him do too much off the dribble. And I think Ohio State has a lot of really athletic guys. And one of the things that in some ways playing small for IU today actually gave Ohio State a chance to get some of their better players on the floor in a way they might not normally have. They didn't play Amir Williams, who has been kind of an unadulterated disaster in his career at Ohio State. They didn't play Trey McDonald for more than a couple minutes. They really, and Anthony Lee played those first few minutes and didn't play hardly at all after that. I mean, they're kind of at their best. They had a chance to get some of their better guys out there. And they've got a lot of interchangeable guys who are right around that 6'6" mark where they, really athletic, switched a lot of things. I thought those guys gave Troy a lot of trouble, very active with their hands, and as he tried to drive into traffic, just lost it continuously, it felt like.
Ryan, any thoughts real quick on Troy?
Yeah, I just think that he tried to do too much. I mean, and that's the hole he falls into a lot of times is trying to force it and do everything off the dribble. And he's gotten better off the dribble. Look, we've been saying it the last couple weeks. His improvement with his ball handling has been great. But I think today he needed to dial it back about a quarter of a step. And it's more important to be under control than it is to be fast. You want to be fast and under control if you can, but you want to be under control first. That's the most important part. And I think Troy just gets going too fast too often, and he did that today. I mean, it was obvious. And like Andy said, he wasn't working the baseline. He wasn't doing any of that stuff, and it was just a different, thing from what is made. It was a different look from what's made him successful early in the conference season. And he wasn't doing much off the ball, and that was a big problem for IU.
Let's talk about a couple of bench guys, and I want to go back to a stretch from the first half that I thought was a really important stretch. It actually is something of a positive for Indiana because, it really looked like the game was going to start to get out of hand there before halftime, and you really felt like Indiana needed to make a little run before the half to make it a game. And to the Hoosiers' credit, they did. I think Ohio State got it up to maybe about a 10-point lead, and Indiana went on a 7-0 run out of a timeout. James Blackman Jr. forced a 5-second call. They made a three. They did a nice job of getting it back so it would be manageable before halftime. And I thought Emmett Holt especially played really, really well during that stretch. He grabbed rebounds. He had a really nice back-to-the-basket move at the end of the shot clock. He showed those flashes that have really tantalized us. Unfortunately, the end of that 7-0 run featured maybe the nadir of Stan Robinson's career at Indiana as he – Indiana got the ball down 3. He had this kind of wild possession where he just threw up a shot. Then he came down, actually played some decent defense on D'Angelo Russell, but then lost what should have been an easy steal. And it just sent Twitter just going crazy with people calling out Stan, and rightfully so because Stan really played poorly in the first half. He got a decent amount of minutes, didn't score, had 2 turnovers, shot a 3 for who knows why, and even prevented a turnover from happening. So I want to talk about those two guys, and Ryan, I'll start with you. And let's start with Emmett first, because here's the thing about Emmett, is I thought he played really well at the end of the first half, like I said, and in Tom Crean's pregame comments, he kind of alluded to the fact that Emmett's hit the freshman wall a little bit. I talked about how important it was for Emmett to, either run through the wall or jump over the wall. He started kind of mixing a lot of metaphors in there, but the point was he's got to get past this little place where he's struggling. And I thought he really did that at the end of the first half, and then he didn't play for the first 12 minutes of the second half. And in a game when Indiana was really struggling to protect the rim at all, who knows if he makes a difference, but I would have liked to see him kind of build on that momentum a little bit earlier in the second half. And I'm sure this is nitpicking, but what'd you think of Emmett there, especially that stretch at the end of the first half? Because I think that's what we need from him, and the struggle is getting that consistently, and as a freshman, we're probably not going to get that from him.
Yeah, I think that in that early first half, he looked pretty good, and he only took one shot from the field, but he had 5 rebounds and 4 points. He missed 2 free throws, but both of them were in and out. So really, I thought it was a solid all-around performance, especially given that he really didn't play against Maryland. But I also think that part of the reason that he didn't come back in was that it would have been really difficult for him to guard Sam Thompson, Jayshawn Tate, or Mark Loving, and that's really the lineup as far as the front court goes that Ohio State was giving. I think Honor, because of his length and athleticism, could have maybe at least given some token defense on one of those guys, whereas Emmett just isn't there yet, and I don't think that he could have. If they drew him out on the perimeter, I think it would have been an even bigger defensive disaster than it was. Had they stuck with Anthony Lee or gone with Amir Williams or someone like that, I think that would have been that would have changed things. But I mean, their lineup, the guys who all went over 30 minutes were Thompson, Tate, Russell, Shannon Scott, and Mark Loving, and then Cam Williams also got 26 minutes. So really, Ohio State used 6 guys all game, and all of them can play on the perimeter. So it was just a tough matchup for Emmett to deal with, especially chasing around someone like Thompson or Tate. So I think that's why he didn't play as much in the second half. I didn't think it was a bad game. I just thought it was a square peg in a round hole kind of thing for him. And
real quick before we move on to Stan, Andy, did you have obviously you'll do the lineup analysis. I guess I'm just surprised looking at this that Evan only played 9 minutes because I thought he played well, and just wondering if I didn't see something, especially with Crean's kind of emphasis there in the pregame on kind of getting Emmett through that wall. I would have thought he would have wanted to build on that momentum from the first half.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he didn't play all that well in the first stretch. He came in the first half, but then did play well down the stretch. But I kind of agree with Ryan. I felt like they took advantage of him in a number of kind of pick and roll situations early in the game that really pulled him away from the basket, and he didn't do a good enough job of really, stopping either of the Ohio State players involved. I mean, at a certain point in the second half, though, I probably would have perhaps earlier than that. I mean, it was evident pretty early on. I mean, Ohio State's first 4 baskets of the half came quickly and were all dunks or layups. So that would be the only reason I could think of, do you do something like that and let him play off of, some of those guys. Tate is obviously a hard matchup. I mean, dare the guy to shoot from the outside and see if he makes it. He's only taken 9 threes on the year and looking over this. I definitely think Loving's a guy that shoots it too well outside to be able to count on him to do that. But yeah, I mean, when Tate's in the game, maybe you have him attempt to guard him, but otherwise, not a lot of guys he was readily able to defend. But at least in the times that they went zone, could he be the middle of that? So if somebody got through, as often was the case against the zone and any other defense IU threw out, maybe he would have been there at the rim. I don't know that it would have made a difference, but I was a little bit surprised, like you, that he didn't at least try to play him a little bit in the beginning of that half. If nothing else, I mean, maybe try to go back to he had one nice post-up move, so I don't want to enter Jeremiah April territory here and say, like, well, one play means he can do all these things, but could you have gone to that?
That shot was beautiful.
Could you have gone to him in the post a time or two in the second half to really try to exploit how Ohio State was playing, which I realize is completely different than what IU's really been doing these last few games. I think that's what the challenge was. Like I said earlier, I think this, in some ways, it's how IU has to play, but it also is the way that Ohio State can get as many of its best players on the floor at the same time. So kind of a perfect storm in that regard, I'd say.
The longer this show goes, the more salty I'm getting, and here's why. Because of a work event, I had to miss the IU Maryland postgame show, which would have been so much fun because that game was so great. And now I have to come back for this, which is, I don't know, it's just kind of a depressing show so far.
Hey, we had a great time without you on Thursday. I don't know.
I know. I watched. You guys were great. But here we go. So here's a little bit of payback, right? I'm going to put you both on the spot right now. Andy, we'll start with you. I would like for you to defend Tom Crean giving Stan Robinson 15 minutes today. There's your challenge. Ryan, you think of something because you're next.
Well, I think so. In the first half, I think it was all because of Robert Johnson getting hurt. He went down pretty early. I thought he landed awkwardly after he made that driving layup. It seemed like he kind of slipped at something and said he had ice in his knee and a brace in the second half. So I think that was the first half for me. And I think you get in a situation where you're trying to play Robinson because of his defensive ability, because your other option at that point, if you want to play kind of the normal lineups I used him playing as Zaislov too, was obviously has his challenges defensively. The problem, as I stated on Twitter earlier, was that Stan apparently is unaware that he is in the game only to play defense and somehow thinks that he is some kind of offensive wizard with the ball in his hands, which is anything but the truth. And so I think again, it's kind of like understanding roles and what guys can do well. He appeared to have no understanding of that whatsoever. And I thought even on that play, the end of the half, to me, the bigger play was the turnover. I know Justin Albert's pointed this out as well. I mean, IU had a chance. It was maybe a 5-second differential, but had a chance to pretty much hold the ball for the last shot. And your worst case there, in my head, is you're going in down 3 after you were just down 10, and had made a nice run at it, got a little momentum, sort things out in the locker room, figure out what you're going to do. Well, so not only does he make the turnover, but then he also, almost forced another 5-second call, I thought. Wasn't able to get the rebound or get the loose ball. And then I thought on the play that, Russell got the 3-point play at the end. I mean, Stan did foul him, but he did the right thing. I mean, he's forced him back to the middle of the court to his offhand. And it was another case that we saw so many times today where, a guy is just driving, 20, 25 feet unimpeded to the basket and nobody's able to step in. So while it was, his man, I don't put that completely on him. I think that's probably as good as I can do because at that point it was evident early on he wasn't going to give you anything on the offensive end. I think the three-pointer came with the shot clock kind of winding down, which I guess is the only way you can justify him shooting anything outside of 3 feet from the basket. But it was pretty tough, and I don't think they had a great chance to figure out how to adjust, obviously not planning on Johnson being out. And then I think things kind of snowballed from there of, again, the defense was so bad, you felt like you had to keep putting him out there to try to get somebody who could defend because nobody else was. But I'm really not sure that there were a lot of other options, which is unfortunate. That's about as good as I can do, which is actually better than I thought I would be able to do when you first started phrasing the question. So, although I will say that Nick, our longtime listener on Twitter, called out that maybe IU could play with 4 and that the open space would make fewer poor decisions. I did tell him that he could keep throwing that out to me, that I was open to the possibility. So as much as I tried to justify,
my team's on the floor there from
yeah, could have gone on that. I don't know. It's tough to justify, but that's the best I can do.
Ryan, are you sleeping? Are you awake?
Oh, I'm awake. I just wish I wasn't.
I think your little icon had just stopped, and you just looked like your head was down. Hey, okay. Now I want to phrase this to you this way, because Andy did a pretty good job of answering that. But let me ask you this: at what point? I think Tom Crean's done a really good job this year. I think individual guys have grown. I think the team has grown in a lot of ways, and I think he's doing a pretty good job overall of helping to mask this team's glaring deficiencies. But we continue to have this situation where the guy who is our absolute worst player in terms of offensive efficiency, Stan Robinson, with his 83.80 rating, is using the highest percentage of possessions when he's on the floor, 27.7%. It's the most ridiculous and unexplainable, unable to be defended disparity that I can think of. So at what point is this a coaching issue where if a guy just isn't getting it and continues to make such poor decisions, what point is that a coaching issue that you can't get through to him and yet you keep putting him on the floor?
Well, let me pose this to you. A kid you recruited and you put on your basketball team, are you legitimately going to tell him, don't do anything on offense?
It's not don't do anything. Okay, it's not don't do anything. Because Stan can drive, but at what point does it get through to him, do the things you're good at? and stop. I mean, why is he taking a three-pointer today?
I agree,
You know what I
but
mean?
like Andy said, in that case, the shot clock was running down a little. It still was a terrible shot. He should never shoot that. I don't care. I'd rather have a shot clock violation than a Stan Robinson three-pointer, quite frankly. Uh,
And that's
but,
where we are.
but most of the other stuff, he was trying to drive, and he'd lose the
Yeah.
ball or something like that. And so people are saying like, he shouldn't do this, he shouldn't do that. Well, I mean, if he's not going to do anything, then there's no reason to have him on the floor, and there's no reason to guard him. You've got to at least have the threat of guarding. I mean, look, against Penn State, he had a great game offensively. I thought he did very well. He was more efficient. He took a stupid jump shot, which, let's face it, he should never take a jump shot. But he had some good movement on offense and things like that. The thing is, the scary thing is that Stan is our second best perimeter defender. And in a game where our defense was awful, you try and change it up and get something out there. And Tom Crean, Jeff Rabjohns just said that Tom Crean on Robert Johnson said he got banged up and he wasn't the same. So if he's not the same, you got to do something. I mean, you're still trying to win the game, and whether it's at some point you're just trying to do something different, and that's probably why Stan got so many minutes. That combined with Johnson getting injured. Whether we support it or not, at least Crean wasn't just running the same lineup out there expecting different results. We were at least trying something different. I mean, we didn't run zone for most of this game. I mean, we had a couple pockets where we ran zone and we got out of it really fast because they attacked it. But usually zone has been at least a third of the game, and today we didn't see much of that. So we were trying man-to-man defense on them to try and stop them, trying to run help defense, and it just wasn't working. Nobody was communicating, and nobody was getting to where they needed to be, so maybe he thought a better one-on-one defender could help things. And that's the only thing I can think of, because you're right, it is kind of a horror story right now, but here's hoping Stan can figure it out, because he's certainly talented.
And it stinks because he brings unique skills to the table. I want the light to go on for him because I feel like there's a really productive basketball player in there somewhere. It's just, for some reason, it's not getting through. Andy, you wanted to jump back in real quick on this before we move on.
Yeah. My only suggestion is that with Stan, instead of having him watch game tape, they have him watch the episode of Seinfeld where George did everything the exact opposite of his instinct, and that's what they tell Stan to do for the next game. Just every instinct you have on the floor, do the exact opposite of that, and that might be the way to turn this around for him.
I kind of wish we'd already gone longer in the show because that would be such a perfect note to end on. It's a good point, Andy. So Yogi, let's talk about Yogi real quick. I mean, he did score 26 points, but it was another one of those games like Eastern Washington where he had 27 points, and Louisville he had 13 points, which is one of the highest. Georgetown we lost, he had 27. The Michigan State game he had 17. There's another one of those games where it was basically Yogi kind of playing hero ball there to keep us in it. And to Yogi's credit, he made a lot of big shots to keep us hanging around. I mean, he's 6 of 11 from downtown. Combine that with his 7 for 8 in his last game, and he's absolutely on fire right now, which is great to see. But we saw some uncharacteristic defensive lapses from Yogi today, kind of like all of his teammates. Ryan, just some quick thoughts on Yogi. I mean, the points were there, which is good. He kept the team hanging around. Unfortunately, today looked a lot like last year where he kind of had to just take over at certain parts just to keep Indiana within, to give him a fighting chance.
Yeah, it's kind of odd how when other guys don't play well, Yogi has his best. It wasn't like he was just shooting like crazy. He was 9 of 16, 6 of 11 from 3. I mean, there were tough shots he was making, but it's not like he was shooting every time down the floor. And that was kind of what would happen last year, is he would just have to play hero ball because nobody would do anything. I thought he was actually pretty efficient tonight, which was really surprising. The problem was there was just too much dribbling and not enough cutting up into the lane, and that's how they beat Maryland. Which Maryland is a better defensive team than Ohio State, and what they did was attacked, went through the paint, kicked it out, or tried to finish and got fouled or something. And today Yogi was the only person who even tried to go through the paint. When you just do that dribble weave on the outside, yeah, it gets the defense moving, and then it has its purpose. But at some point, you've got to cut it up inside and do something. And everybody looked tentative today. Everybody looked like they wanted to just give the ball up as soon as they got it. They were looking for the next guy to pass to. And it's fine to pass the ball, but you've got to pass the ball with purpose. You don't just send it along. You've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to have your head in the game. And I mean, I only had 9 assists today, and that's more than they probably should have had, given how stagnant the offense was. It was too much one-on-one ball, and that includes Yogi. I mean, I thought he played fairly well. You're right. He had some defensive lapses, but he also didn't have any help behind him. And you're supposed to have help behind you when you're playing defense. And if a guy gets a step on you, you're supposed to be able to rely on somebody else stepping in and helping out. So it was a fine game from Yogi. He's our best player. There's no question about it. And but it's about the other guys stepping up and doing stuff too and being aggressive so he doesn't have to shoulder all of the load.
So, do either of you guys have much more to say about this game? Because, frankly, I'd kind of like to turn the page and look at Purdue. I mean, I feel like we've highlighted the big issues. Any other individuals either one of you guys want to touch on? If so, jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, the one guy we haven't talked about was Blackman.
Blackman.
Especially after his last couple games. I don't really have anything to add on Yogi other than what Ryan said. But, yeah, I mean, I thought Blackman was really – there were times today – I mean, he ended up, I think, taking, I just looked at this, the most 2-point shots. I mean, he eventually tried to get the ball to the basket, but he had a number of those cases that we've seen from him this year where sometimes he just seems hell-bent on driving in and taking a shot and ends up getting a few blocked along the way, and I thought that happened to him a couple times today, and a few times just, somewhat the same thing with Yogi, but he, made more shots, but just like way too much dribbling and trying to, dribble back and forth and things like that, and they really just weren't able to turn the corner with any regularity. Blackman did really well, mixing things up against Maryland, was able to get some shots at the rim, also some shots from three, and I thought he really struggled throughout and took some shots that were, kind of, we talked about this before, like shooting for the sake of shooting. I just thought there were times where, some of the shot selection was a little selfish, I guess is maybe the easiest way to say. He just didn't seem to do the things that, again, we kind of talk about this. Do guys understand what they're doing when they're playing well? And it seemed like for today, he got away from the things that made him really effective these last couple of games in terms of being a little bit more varied, but also being under control and making sure that he took, good shots and things like that. I thought he really struggled. And you got to give a lot of credit to Ohio State's defense for that. I thought they really were harassing IU on the perimeter, particularly, Shane Scott, Sam Thompson, and that contributed to guys not being able to turn the corner. But there was a lot of needless movement and needless dribbling that never got its way inside the three-point line for Blackman and for a number of guys on IU as a whole.
Yeah, it was almost like, to jump in here, it was almost like Blackman forgot the last 2 games happened where he had his breakout and had been playing so well. It just, I've talked about this endlessly, is that he just goes up to the rim sometimes really soft, and I thought in the last 3 games he was going much stronger to the rim. And today I thought he kind of at times went strong and at times just reverted to that old, I'm better than everybody, so this is going to go in, and that's just not going to work in the Big Ten, even if you're not facing a lot of size. So I thought that was a problem. I do want to talk about Max Hotzel. I didn't think he played amazingly well, but I think you're getting some confident minutes out of him that we weren't getting 3 weeks ago, and maybe it's just a growing confidence for him. I just thought he was, came in and was competent in a game where most other people weren't. And defensively, he's still got some issues, obviously, and everybody had issues today, and it's more of a team effort defensively that was the problem. But I just thought Hotzel offensively was actually aggressive and doing some positive things. Also, I don't know if either of you noticed this, but my minutes just refreshed, and Anthony Lee only played 2 minutes today, and he started. That's kind of crazy. So Ohio State was clearly going with a perimeter-oriented attack. I did not know that. I thought he was in there more, but yeah.
Wow, that's odd. That actually provides a nice segue to talking about Indiana's game against Purdue, because my guess is the guy who starts at center for the Boilermakers will probably play more than 2 minutes on Wednesday night, unless we foul him out in the first 5 minutes, which would be great. So, this probably isn't going to make anybody feel better coming off of this loss, but Indiana now faces a team that has 2 guys who are 7 feet tall or taller, who use 28.8 or more % of Purdue's possessions when they're on the floor. So clearly, Purdue is a team focused on getting the ball inside, and with Colin Hartman starting at center and Indiana's inability to prevent layups today. The difference, of course, is that this wasn't Ohio State throwing it down to their centers for back-to-the-basket layups. This was just Ohio State driving by us. With Purdue, that lane is going to be a little bit more clogged, so it's going to be a completely different matchup. So let's talk about this game as we look ahead. Andy, I'll start with you. You look at it on the one hand, it looks like an absolute disaster of a matchup because how in God's name, A.J. Hammonds, we know sometimes he just doesn't even show up for games, but those games are not when Indiana is on the schedule. So on the one hand, you look at it and it's like, well, okay, these guys are just going to absolutely dominate us down low. But on the other hand, now you've got kind of a big, slower guy out there. Indiana should be able to take advantage of him on offense. When you look at this game, does it terrify you? Does it get you excited for what Indiana can exploit? Or is it kind of a little bit of both?
Yeah, kind of a mixed bag, I would say. I mean, in watching Purdue some this year, there are definitely times when they are prone to getting away from getting Hammonds the ball on a regular basis, which, when you watch, IU and you're like, it seems unconscionable that you could have a big guy that you wouldn't get the ball to a lot, although IU fans have, remarked for years that that's been an issue. But given a team like IU has this year with, no real post presence, it seems unbelievable that they wouldn't get him the ball every time down. But I do think that's something that, while his presence is concerning, I also think I've, at least in stretches of Purdue games I've watched this year, have seen them get away from that at times. So that, to me, is at least a potentially good omen. But, when you look at their numbers, they're a really good two-point shooting team, which is really the same with Ohio State coming into today, although the difference is Ohio State also shot it well from three. Purdue at this point just under 33% from three on the season. And so they don't take a ton of threes. That not to say that number is misleading, but that's just not a big part of their offense. So, I have to think you're going to see more zone from IU in this one. This is a game where Holt's going to have to give him minutes. I wouldn't be surprised to see Ryan Burton play a little bit just to try to have some different bodies to rotate and just some other fouls to give on Hammonds. Because if Purdue is intent on getting Hammonds the ball and consistently does so, it's going to be really problematic for IU because there just isn't an answer on this roster for him at this point. So, on the other end of the floor, you have to be able to exploit that and pull him away from the basket if you can to open up some of those driving lanes, make him try to defend a Hartman outside with the points when IU is playing those kinds of lineups, because that's going to be a challenge for him. We've seen Hartman put the ball on the floor a bit more of late. I think you're going to need to see that during the game as well. I mean, you can't just – you have to exploit the matchup on the other end if it's going to be exploited against you, on offense. So it'll be interesting to see, how much Purdue really gets him the ball and how adamant they are about doing that. But I think it's a concern going in, but also a chance for IU to exploit things if they're, equally forceful in trying to go at him on the other end.
Yeah, Ryan, what are your thoughts heading into this game? I mean, do you have a sense of confidence that Indiana's going to bounce back from this Ohio State loss? Clearly going to be a pretty tough environment to play in there Wednesday night.
Yeah, I don't really know how to feel about it. I mean, Purdue is a team that's been up and down all year. Sometimes they look very good, and sometimes they just look like a lower-tier Big Ten team. It all depends on how they come out and what they try and do to attack. I do think Matt Painter is a solid coach. I don't think he's a great coach. I think he's a solid coach, and I think that he's going to look at this Ohio State game for Indiana and say, this is a game we need to win at home now. This is a game we should be able to win at home. And quite frankly, going into every game now, because they beat Maryland and because they were in first place in the Big Ten, Indiana's going to have a target on its back. So teams are not going to take this team lightly anymore. And that's a new thing for these guys. They've got to learn how to play when you're expected to win. And remember, I mean, there were a lot of people who thought we'd start this conference season out 1-5 or 1-6. There was a real possibility of that. And we're 5-2 right now. We're still in a good place. I mean, today's game notwithstanding, we're still in a good place. And it's going to be about figuring out, how to attack that lineup for Purdue, and these guys better bounce back. I mean, they're going to watch this film and wish they hadn't watched it, and so they're young guys. Will they come back and react in a positive way? I certainly hope so. They have so far this year. The losses to Louisville and Michigan State really refocused them. So let's hope that does that. This loss does that.
Yeah, to your point, Zach Osterman tweeted out, Shannon Scott just described Indiana as a, quote, big-time team. That's a new reality Hoosiers have to come to terms with. And you're right. I mean, this team has been an underdog all season long, kind of this upstart, the injuries, the expectations were low. And that win on national, well, I guess it wasn't on national TV since it was ESPNU, but that win over Maryland really kind of blew the doors off of that because I mean Indiana kind of announced itself, and shoot, if Michigan had beaten Wisconsin last night, Indiana would have been alone in first place in the Big Ten for 12 hours. Hey, it's longer than we thought we'd be in first place at any point coming into the season, so I was rooting for it to happen. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting game. I don't know how to feel about it either because on the one hand, frankly, my gut feeling about it is I don't have much confidence in that game. Just to put it out there, just because of the matchup, because it's at Purdue, because of what we saw right here. But the thing is, when I think about it, I start to talk myself into it more because for the most part, this team has bounced back from losses. Yeah, they've played pretty poorly on the road against Michigan State and Ohio State, but I think Purdue is a notch below those teams. And Indiana's done pretty well on the road against the likes of
Hey.
Illinois and Nebraska, which is where Purdue is. Yeah, what?
Yeah, and Nebraska just beat Michigan State, so that's clearly not like we caught them on a year where it's easy to beat them on the road. I mean, so Indiana already has 2 road wins. They can get a third. I mean, it's starting to look like a really good season. The goal in the Big Ten is always, and we've talked about this, is to win all your home games and pick off a few on the road, 3, 4, maybe 5 if you can, and you're having a great season. And to already have to have won all our home games and have 2 road wins already, that's a pretty solid start. So, we get another one, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think having lost this game today, hopefully it will refocus the guys on defense a little bit. Some of the focus and the effort and kind of the want to on defense that we didn't see today, hopefully will be there Wednesday night. I don't know. I mean, you look at Ken Pom, he gives Purdue a 53% chance of winning. That seems about right. It really does seem like a game that could go either way. So we'll see. I mean, Andy, I guess it's time to go on the record here. What's your official pick for IU Purdue?
Oh man,
Yeah, that's right.
it's hard to say. It's hard to pick these especially in the aftermath of the debacle today, and think that try to envision a way they're gonna attack a team that has shot the ball really well inside the arc.
That's what makes it fun, though.
I don't know I don't think anything's been fun about today so far, so I don't know what you're talking about. But I'm gonna go with IU. Maybe because I can't bring myself to pick Purdue. I don't know, but I think the things that you kind of look at statistically that could play in IU's favor. Purdue's last in the Big Ten in Big Ten games with 3-point shooting percentage. If IU goes to zone, they're sure to see some open looks from 3. But I guess I'd rather get beat that way than get beat with their best player, hammering it inside. Purdue is last in the league in Big Ten play in defensive free throw rate. I think that's an area where if IU is able to spread them out, maybe they get some advantages there and get to the line. So those are the couple things I'm going to hang my hat on. 2-point defense, they're tops in the league. I think largely because of the shot blocking prowess of Hammonds, I would guess. And so I think that's going to be a challenge for IU to score inside. But I'm hopeful that Hartman can continue his hot shooting, pull Hammonds away from the basket, create some mismatches. I don't think you're going to see – there's no way you'll see Painter completely go away from playing a big guy like we've seen with Maryland and with Ohio State these last couple games. I mean, they really have to keep him on the floor. But I hope that IU can cause enough problems on the offensive end to do that. And I'm not sure that I can compound the frustration of this game by listening to myself utter the words that I'm picking Purdue to be IU. So perhaps not the best rationale to go with IU here, but I can at least sleep at night knowing that I did not pick Boilermakers.
Of all the surprising things about this season, the fact that you have now picked Indiana in all 5 games since we started this picks challenge, and that includes road games, games against top 15 teams. I mean, your support of Tom Crean is it's impressive and surprising, Andy. But
I've never been happier with him than I have been this year. No, I mean, that's the one thing that's hard about this is that you look at some of these games in the Big Ten in general, it feels like they're all a coin flip. And to me, when I get into a coin flip with kind of with my gut being to pick IU, then I'm more often than not going to do that. quick sneak peek to the game at Wisconsin on Tuesday, February 3rd. I can say with relative certainty that I will pick against IU in that game, although likely not before with the Rutgers game sandwiched between Purdue and that one. And then we'll see what happens from there. But that will likely be the first time. I'm not sure that anything I see from IU in these next two games would make me feel significantly different about that.
Okay, Ryan, over to you. IU, Purdue, who you got?
I'm picking IU because this team would not do that to me. They would not lose to Purdue. They like me too much. They would not put me through that after today. But no, I think I'm picking IU because AJ Hammonds is only averaging 22 minutes a game. He's only averaging 6.1 rebounds. He's shooting 48% from the field. He does have 2 blocks per game, but he's also turning the ball over he's averaging 2.5 blocks per game, and he's also turning the ball over 2.4 times per game. He's not some invincible monolith that we're not going to be able to deal with. I think it'll be difficult, but this team has overcome obstacles before, and I think going into that game again, they'll be the underdog, and I think that's a position they really like, and so I think they're going to go in and beat them at Mackey because, like I said, they wouldn't do that to us. They like us too much.
Yeah, I kind of thought that Indiana would lose one of these two games, either the Ohio State game or the Purdue game. And just because it's hard to win 2 straight games on the road, and you had to feel like they were going to be a little overconfident after that Maryland game. So the fact that they lost today, I do think they'll come back a little bit more refocused. I mean, you should always be focused for that Purdue game, but even a little more humbled and just remembering that extra gear you have to have on defense to win. And I think they will. I think they'll find a way to do it. Obviously, it's going to be a weird game, a tremendous contrast of styles, which will make it fun. And the atmosphere at Mackey will make it fun, as annoying as their fans are, and as not as great as Assembly Hall as Mackey Arena is. It'll still be a pretty fun game, a fun atmosphere. And here's the thing: we're doing it for the Village Deli. Damn it.
Oh.
We gotta win for the Village Deli, and so the players may not have known about that, the fire at the Village Deli that happened pretty much right before the game, but they certainly will now. So do it for the deli.
Yeah, and I know you grew up there, Jerod, but that town just smells, man. Every time I've been through there, it just smells like manure or something.
All right, hold on here. I did not grow up there. I did go to high school there, but
okay, I grew
up in Bloomington. I grew up in Bloomington. I used to have a T-shirt that said "Directions to West Lafayette: Go north till you smell it, and west till you step in it." It does actually smell when you drive into Lafayette. That's not just some Indiana joke.
I'm not joking. It does.
There kind of stinks.
My mom, for some of you know, my mom writes cookbooks and does cooking classes in the Midwest, and she does classes in Lafayette. Has a great cooking school there that she goes to all the time, but every time she leaves, she's like, man, it's like breathing fresh air for the first time when you leave town. So It's true. It's true, folks. I'm sorry.
Ryan, or Andy, do you have any thoughts on the olfactory characteristics of West Lafayette?
No, although I do believe that I also had the same shirt that you referenced at some point in my life, so we can share that. I also had another one that said that had a picture of Purdue Pete with a line through it on the front that said "Friends don't let friends watch Purdue basketball." So that was another classic from the collection that I've either outgrown or worn so much that it was too thin to.
Let's face it. The best one is Purdue keeping ugly girls out of Indiana since whenever it was founded. That's the best one.
Well, let's hope that we are as jovial and laughing after that game as we are. I'm glad we ended this with a round of jokes because, frankly, that game was kind of depressing today. Again, 82-70, Indiana loses. Just poor defense all around for the Hoosiers, and the defense is going to have to be a lot better Wednesday night in West Lafayette for Indiana to win that game. I think it will. Obviously, we all picked Indiana, so we do think the Hoosiers will bounce back. But with that said, let me check Twitter real quick and make sure, no questions today. I think everybody just went on about their Sundays after that performance, which is certainly to be expected. Let's do some quick final thoughts. Andy, then Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I think this will be a great test of the team's resiliency. I mentioned a couple games ago, I felt like we were getting to the point where that was starting to be the one thing that had changed since the beginning of the season, is kind of feelings on the team's resiliency and ability to bounce back. And I thought there were a few times during the game today that they showed the same thing, that they never really completely let the game get away from them. And while they never really got back too terribly close. They also didn't let it get completely out of hand. I thought there were times that they hit big shots toward the end of the first half, and even a couple times in the second half. Just couldn't get enough stops. So I think this will be another test of that resiliency going into West Lafayette on Wednesday. And the other thing, I think when look at kind of hostile environments, this will definitely be the most hostile, because if you look back to, I think, Michigan State and Nebraska, students really weren't back. Today's game at Ohio State didn't sound like there was a tremendous crowd there, and then Illinois, I don't know, that didn't really feel it there. I don't know. So I think this will be a game where it's kind of them against the world mentality, and we'll see how they band together. I definitely hope Robert Johnson will be able to be back for that, because I think he's a big part of that, not only because his presence keeps Stan off the floor, but also just because it gives IU another guy who can be a solid defender, get to the basket, but also knock down some shots. I thought that was one of the key points of the game as well. So hoping everything is okay with him and he'll be able to come back and the team will be able to bounce back. But certainly got whatever wind was in their sails, I think a bit of that got taken out today, and hopefully some lessons to be learned on the defensive end. But again, I think we're going to see this team struggle defensively. We're going to see them struggle defensively on Wednesday night. I'm sure they just can't compound that with turnovers, because they have an offense that's good enough to score a lot of points against pretty much any defenses. They've shown over the course of the season that they just can't lose possessions. And so I know you did some work early in the year kind of looking back at some teams who had a really good offense and not a great defense. And I think one of the common threads of a lot of those teams was taking really good care of the basketball and being able to offset some of those. You're able to outscore people a little bit better the more chances you get to score. So I think that's something they just we can't see that a lot. I think the matchup really allowed Ohio State to play some of their better players, and they really exerted themselves defensively. But hopefully a big bounce back spot for IU, kind of put it behind them and move forward. Would love to see Blackman have a good game. Obviously, any of the Indiana kids you always want to see play well in that one. So hopefully he and Yogi and Hartman will really step up and kind of atone for, I guess not in Blackman's case because he wasn't there, but I think that was the low point of last season for me, was how this team came out and played West Lafayette. So hopefully that provides a little bit of extra motivation for them going into the game on Wednesday and get back on the winning side of things.
Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, this team's going to watch film of today's game and be embarrassed, I think. And not because of effort or anything like that, but because this game was so winnable if they just did the right things, like the simple things, like communicating on defense, attacking through the paint like they've done all year. That's what's won them games. Those two things have won them games this year. And they don't have to be perfect. They just have to be good enough. And I think that they're going to look at that, and that's going to be a heavy focus this week in preparation and during the game. And I think that if they communicate and they do the things they need to do on offense, like getting inside the three-point line, getting into the paint, and finding shooters or moving the ball from there, they can beat really anybody in this conference, maybe outside of Wisconsin. And they've kind of proved that this year so far. The top team other than Wisconsin in the conference this year has been Maryland, and the other one's Ohio State, and they beat both those teams. So if they get back to doing that, they can beat Purdue, and I think that's going to be the heavy focus this week, is defensive communication and getting the ball inside the three-point line and actually attacking instead of just kind of wandering around outside the three-point line. So just aggressiveness and communication are the two things they need to focus on this week.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat. I think this was the stat. It was in an article by Terry Hutchins that the last 13 times Indiana has won 15 of its first 19 games, as they did this year, they've made the NCAA tournament. And, of course, Indiana now 15-5 after today's loss. But, again, this is a game that I think we expected to lose. So I don't think a whole lot changes. And I was definitely disappointed with how Indiana played today, just in terms of its defense and kind of the focus throughout the game. But I was pretty disappointed, too, in the fan reaction. It felt too negative. I know the game wasn't going great, but just some of the reactions, some of the tweets I was getting felt a little negative, all things considered. Considering Indiana was 5-1, in the conference, considering, what this team has been able to do with such a gaping hole in the middle and with these pieces missing. And considering the fact that they, instead of getting their doors blown off like they could have, they somehow found a way to at least stick with it. And Ohio State didn't really get back to that, kind of take control for, take total control until the very end, where they pushed it back up to 12 points, and Indiana was clearly out of it. So, I just want to stress to everybody that, the issues facing Indiana are not going to be fixed. I mean, this is a team that's going to have defensive struggles all year. Granted, they compounded them with the turnovers today, and that was disappointing. It was a disappointing effort. But, try as much as you can, especially in this game against Purdue and some of these road games coming up, to not, jump off the bandwagon quite so quickly when things start looking a little bit bad. Because I think this team has shown the resiliency. They've shown that fight for us to believe in them. And even when the chips get down, keep kind of fighting along as fans instead of piling on. And it just felt like there was a little bit of piling on today. And maybe it's, kind of a moot point and unnecessary to discuss after a kind of an uninspiring 12-point loss. But this team, I think, is still going to take us on a pretty good ride this year. This loss doesn't really change that for me. It's really, frankly, a loss that I expected to happen at some point, whether it was against Ohio State or some other road game. So I think, again, this team has shown us enough. Stick with them. I think they're going to come back with a nice, big bounce-back effort Wednesday night against Purdue. And, of course, if they do, all will be right again in Hoosier land, because nothing at all can cure the hangover of a bad loss like a win against Purdue. So hopefully Indiana is able to do it. We will be here live after the game, as we always are, to break it down, win or lose, no matter what happens. And make sure you get on the email list, assemblycall.com/subscribe. Get our post-game analysis email. We only send it out to email subscribers. It comes the day after game. So assemblycall.com/subscribe. Get on there. Get it. And with that said, Hoosiers lose 82-70. Hopefully we bounce back Wednesday night. Thank you for watching. We will talk to you on Wednesday, everybody.